a homeless boy finds the deeds of a millionaire when he said what he wanted in return. The dim streetlight cast long shadows across the rain-slicked alley as Mason's trembling hands clutched the leather portfolio he'd just found. His heart pounded against his ribs as he opened it, revealing property deeds worth millions. The 10-year-old boy's breath caught in his throat. This could be his ticket out of poverty, away from the cold streets that had been his only home since that terrible night 2 years ago. Through the portfolio's expensive leather, he could almost feel the weight of his past pressing down on him. The image of his mother's lifeless body on their apartment floor flashed before his eyes, the empty pill bottle still rolling across the wooden boards. His father's final words echoed in his ears, "I'm sorry, son. I can't live without her." The gunshot that followed had shattered more than just the midnight silence. It had shattered Mason's entire world. But now fate had placed something valuable in his dirty, calloused hands. The deeds belonged to Nicholas Parker, one of the city's wealthiest businessmen. Mason had seen his name in newspapers he'd used as blankets on countless freezing nights. One of these properties alone could provide him with shelter, food, and the life he'd lost when his parents left this world. Yet, as he stood there in the shadows, something stirred in his heart. His mother's voice, gentle and clear, from a time before the pills took her away. "Honesty is the only treasure worth keeping, my love." His fingers tightened around the portfolio as tears began to blur his vision. The choice before him felt like a knife's edge: survival or integrity, desperation or dignity. Looking up at the towering mansion at the end of the street, its windows glowing with warmth he hadn't felt in years, Mason made his decision. His feet began moving before his mind could second-guess itself, each step taking him closer to the Parker estate. What waited behind those grand doors he couldn't know. But for the first time since his parents' deaths, he felt something like hope flickering in his chest, not because of the valuable documents in his hands, but because he was choosing to do what was right, even when life had given him every reason to do otherwise. Hey everyone! Before we dive into today's story, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you find this content interesting, don't forget to hit that subscribe button to support the channel and never miss our upcoming exciting stories. Thank you all so much. Life on the streets had taught Mason lessons no child should have to learn. At 10 years old, he had mastered the art of becoming invisible when necessary and appearing harmless when visibility was unavoidable. His small frame, made smaller by malnutrition, moved through the city's shadows like a ghost, searching for scraps of food and safe places to sleep. The oversized, threadbare jacket he wore had been his father's last gift. Now it served as both clothing and blanket, carrying with it memories of warmer, happier days. Every morning began before dawn, when the city was still quiet enough that he could hear his own heartbeat. Mason would emerge from whatever shelter he'd found, sometimes a cardboard box in an alley, sometimes the relative luxury of an abandoned building's doorway. His daily routine was a careful dance of survival, checking dumpsters behind restaurants before they opened, hanging around school zones where kind-hearted parents might spare some change, and always watching for danger. The memories of his parents' deaths haunted him like persistent shadows. That fatal night 2 years ago played on repeat in his dreams. His mother, once beautiful and full of life, had succumbed to the demons that came in little orange bottles. Mason remembered how she'd changed over the years, becoming a hollow version of herself, until finally he found her motionless on their apartment floor. The pill bottle lay empty beside her, a silent witness to her final moments. His father, a man who had once filled their home with laughter and warmth, couldn't bear the loss. Mason still heard the crack of the gunshot in his nightmares, still saw his father's tears as he apologized one last time. The police had come, there had been discussions about relatives and foster care, but Mason had run away before they could lock him into a system he feared more than the streets. Sometimes in his darkest moments he wondered if he should have stayed, but the freedom of the streets, harsh as it was, felt safer than the unknown of foster homes. In stark contrast to Mason's world of survival and shadows stood Nicholas Parker's realm of privilege and power. The 55-year-old business magnate had built his empire from the ground up, but success had come at a personal cost. His wife's death during childbirth 15 years ago had left him a single father to their son James, and the weight of that responsibility had shaped every decision since. Nicholas's imposing figure commanded respect in boardrooms across the city, his sharp business acumen matched only by his reputation for fair dealing. Behind the carefully maintained facade of success, Nicholas carried his own burdens. His massive estate, with its manicured gardens and marble halls, felt emptier with each passing year. Despite his best efforts, the relationship with his son James had grown increasingly strained. The ghost of his late wife seemed to hover in every corner, her absence a constant reminder of what their family had lost. James Parker, at 15, was a study in contradiction. Privileged but lonely, intelligent but bitter, he had grown up in the shadow of his father's success and his mother's absence. From the outside, he appeared to have everything: wealth, education, opportunity, but inside he nursed a deep-seated anger at the world. His father's dedication to work had left him feeling neglected, and his mother's death had created a void no amount of money could fill. The thought of sharing his father's attention with a street urchin was more than he could bear. The young heir watched from his window each morning as their chauffeur drove his father to work, leaving him alone in the vast mansion with only the staff for company. His prep school classmates either fawned over his wealth or resented it, leaving him with acquaintances but no true friends. James had learned to wear his privilege like armor, using it to keep others at a safe distance while secretly yearning for genuine connection. As Mason made his way through the city's underbelly and the Parkers moved through their world of privilege, none of them could have predicted how their lives were about to intersect. The property deeds in Mason's hands would serve as the catalyst for a chain of events that would challenge everything they thought they knew about family, loyalty, and redemption. The city continued its daily rhythm, oblivious to the drama about to unfold within its streets, where a simple act of honesty would set in motion changes that would ripple through all their lives forever. The grand iron gates of the Parker estate loomed before Mason, their intricate designs seeming to mock his ragged appearance. His heart thundered in his chest as he pressed the intercom button, the leather portfolio clutched tightly against his chest like a shield. The crackle of the speaker made him jump, and a stern voice demanded to know his business. Mason's voice trembled as he explained about the documents, half expecting to be dismissed or worse, accused of theft. To his surprise, the gates slowly opened with a mechanical whir. The long walk up the curved driveway felt like crossing an ocean, each step taking him further from his world of survival and deeper into unknown territory. The mansion grew more imposing with every step, its windows staring down at him like judgmental eyes. Mason's worn sneakers left faint, dirty marks on the pristine pathway, making him acutely aware of how out of place he was in this realm of wealth and privilege. The massive front door opened before he could knock, revealing Harrison, the Parker family's long-serving butler. The elderly man's face was a careful mask of professional neutrality, but his eyes betrayed a hint of suspicion as they traveled from Mason's matted hair to his threadbare clothes. "Mr. Parker will see you in his study," Harrison announced, his crisp British accent making Mason feel even more inadequate. The interior of the mansion left Mason breathless. Crystal chandeliers hung from soaring ceilings, their light dancing off marble floors and antique furniture that probably cost more than he'd ever seen in his life. Family portraits lined the walls, generations of Parkers staring down at him as he followed Harrison through the maze of corridors. Among them, Mason noticed a beautiful woman with kind eyes who bore a striking resemblance to James' missus Parker, he guessed, whose death had left such a void in this household. Nicholas Parker's study was a testament to power and success, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a massive mahogany desk that dominated the room. The man himself stood by the window, his tall frame silhouetted against the morning light. When he turned to face Mason, his expression was unreadable, but his eyes were sharp and assessing. "So, you're the boy who found my documents," Nicholas stated, his deep voice filling the room. Mason nodded, stepping forward to place the portfolio on the desk with trembling hands. "Yes, sir. I found them in an alley near 5th Street. I saw your name and I thought you'd want them back." As Nicholas examined the contents of the portfolio, the door suddenly burst open. James Parker strode in, his prep school uniform immaculate, his face contorting with disdain at the sight of Mason. "Father, I need to—" He stopped short, his nose wrinkling as if he'd smelled something unpleasant. "What's going on? Who is this?" Nicholas looked up from the documents, his expression softening slightly. "This young man has just returned some very important property deeds that went missing yesterday. Documents that could have caused us significant problems if they'd fallen into the wrong hands." He turned to Mason, his gaze intensifying. "Why did you bring these back? You must have known their value." Mason felt James's hostile stare burning into him as he answered truthfully, "It was the right thing to do, sir. They're not mine, and keeping them wouldn't have made them mine." He swallowed hard, fighting the urge to run from the room. "My mom, before she died, she always said honesty was the only treasure worth keeping." A flash of something recognition, perhaps, or memory crossed Nicholas's face. James, however, scoffed audibly. "Oh, please. He's obviously hoping for a reward. These street rats always have an angle." His words dripped with contempt, but Mason detected something else beneath the surface: fear, maybe, or insecurity. "James," Nicholas warned, his tone sharp. "That's enough." He turned back to Mason, his expression thoughtful. "What's your name, son?" "Mason, sir. Just Mason." "And where are your parents, Mason?" The question hit like a physical blow. Mason's throat tightened as he forced out the words, "They're gone, sir. Both of them. 2 years ago." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken questions. James shifted uncomfortably, some of the hostility leaving his face despite himself. Nicholas walked around his desk, approaching Mason slowly, as if afraid of startling him. "And you've been on the street since then?" Mason nodded, unable to trust his voice. His eyes burned with unshed tears, but he refused to let them fall. He'd learned long ago that crying didn't solve anything. Nicholas exchanged a long look with Harrison, who had remained quietly by the door. Some unspoken understanding passed between them, born of years of service and trust. Finally, Nicholas turned back to Mason, his expression softer than before. "Would you like something to eat, Mason? Perhaps we could continue this conversation over breakfast." Before Mason could respond, James interjected, "Father, you can't be serious. He's clearly—" "James," Nicholas cut him off firmly, "either join us for breakfast or return to your studies. But I will not have you speaking to our guest this way." The word guest hung in the air, foreign and unexpected. Mason stood frozen, caught between his instinct to flee and a desperate hunger for more than just food. After 2 years of surviving on scraps and kindness from strangers, the offer of a proper meal seemed almost too good to be true. James stormed out of the study, slamming the door behind him. The sound made Mason flinch, but Nicholas pretended not to notice. Instead, he placed a gentle hand on Mason's shoulder, guiding him toward the door. "Come, son. Let's get some food in you, and then we can talk about what happens next." As they left the study, Mason couldn't help but feel that he'd crossed some invisible threshold. Whether it led to salvation or further heartbreak remained to be seen, but for the first time in 2 years he allowed himself to hope for something more than mere survival. Over breakfast, served in the sunlit dining room, Nicholas Parker watched Mason eat with the careful restraint of someone accustomed to making food last. Despite his obvious hunger, the boy took small, measured bites, occasionally glancing up as if afraid the meal might be taken away. Each cautious gesture told a story of survival that stirred something deep in Nicholas's heart. "Mason," Nicholas began, setting down his coffee cup, "I've been thinking about your situation." He paused, choosing his words carefully. What would you say if I offered you a home here? Mason's fork clattered against his plate. "Sir," he whispered, disbelief etched across his face. "I'm proposing to legally adopt you," Nicholas continued, his voice gentle but firm. "To give you a proper home, education and family." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. The silence was shattered by James's explosive entrance. "You can't be serious," he shouted, face flushed with anger. "Father, this is absurd. You don't know anything about him." Nicholas remained calm, though his eyes hardened. "I know he's a child who needs help, James. I know he showed remarkable honesty and integrity by returning those documents. And I know it's the right thing to do." The right thing? James's laugh was bitter. "What about me? What about Mom? Are you trying to replace her memory with some charity case?" His voice cracked on the last words, revealing the pain beneath his anger. Mason stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I should go," he mumbled, but Nicholas held up a hand. "Sit down, Mason. James, your mother would be the first to open our home to a child in need. You know that." Nicholas's voice softened. "This isn't about replacing anyone. It's about helping someone who deserves a chance." James slammed his fist on the table, making the silverware jump. "He'll ruin everything. Our reputation, our family name. Have you even thought about what people will say? A street kid in the Parker family." "That's enough." Nicholas's voice thundered through the room. "Mason has shown more character in one morning than I've seen from many adults in their entire lives. He's staying, James. This isn't up for discussion." Tears of rage and hurt filled James's eyes. "Fine, but don't expect me to play happy families with him." He stormed out, leaving behind a silence thick with tension. Mason sat rigid in his chair, eyes fixed on his plate. "Mr. Parker, I don't want to cause problems. Your son is right. I don't belong here." Nicholas moved to kneel beside Mason's chair, forcing the boy to meet his eyes. "Listen to me carefully, Mason. James is hurting, and his pain is making him cruel. But that doesn't make him right. You showed extraordinary integrity today, and I believe you deserve an extraordinary chance in return." Tears welled in Mason's eyes. "But why? Why would you want someone like me?" "Because," Nicholas said softly, 15 years ago I lost my wife when James was born. Since then I've thrown myself into business thinking wealth could fill the void she left. But seeing you today, seeing your honesty despite having every reason to be dishonest, it reminded me of what truly matters." Harrison appeared silently in the doorway, holding a folder. "The initial papers are ready, sir, as requested." Nicholas nodded, taking the folder. "These are temporary guardianship papers, Mason. They'll allow you to stay here legally while we begin the formal adoption process. The choice is yours, but I want you to know that this offer comes from my heart, not from pity." Mason's hands trembled as he took the papers. "What about James?" "Give him time," Nicholas said. "He's not as hard as he pretends to be. He's just scared of change, of losing what little family he has left." From somewhere upstairs came the sound of slamming doors and muffled shouting James, presumably venting his fury to the household staff. Mason flinched at each bang, but Nicholas remained steady. "I know this is overwhelming," Nicholas continued, "but sometimes the biggest changes in our lives come from the smallest moments of choice. You chose honesty this morning, Mason. Now I'm choosing to offer you a future." Tears finally spilled down Mason's cheeks as he nodded slowly. "Yes," he whispered. "Yes, I want to stay." Nicholas pulled him into a gentle embrace, feeling the boy's thin frame shake with suppressed sobs. Above them, another door slammed, a physical punctuation mark to the morning's events. But Nicholas held firm to his decision, knowing that while the path ahead would be challenging, it was undoubtedly the right one. As Harrison began making arrangements for Mason's immediate needs, new clothes, a room preparation, medical checkups, Nicholas couldn't help but reflect on how life could change in an instant. One morning had transformed not just Mason's future, but the entire Parker household. The ripples of this decision would be felt for years to come, and while James's opposition worried him, Nicholas felt more certain of this choice than any business decision he'd ever made. In that moment, as morning sunlight streamed through the dining room windows, a new family was born, irregular, uncertain, and facing countless challenges, but born nonetheless of kindness, hope, and the simple choice to do what was right. The transition into the Parker household was like stepping into another world for Mason. His new room, larger than any apartment he'd ever lived in, felt overwhelmingly spacious. The first night he slept on the plush carpet beside the king-sized bed, unable to adjust to such luxury. Harrison found him there in the morning, curled up in a tight ball, as if still trying to conserve warmth on the streets. Each day brought new adjustments. Learning to use the multiple shower settings, understanding which fork was for what course at dinner, and navigating the vastness of the mansion, it was all a careful dance of adaptation. Nicholas hired tutors to assess Mason's educational level and begin preparing him for proper schooling. Despite years out of education, Mason proved to be a quick learner, his survival-honed intelligence readily adapting to formal studies. Harrison became an unexpected ally, patiently teaching Mason the intricacies of high society life. The butler's stern exterior masked a kind heart, and he took particular pride in helping Mason master the proper etiquette expected of a Parker. "Shoulders back, young sir," he would remind gently. "A gentleman carries himself with dignity, regardless of his origins." The most challenging adjustment wasn't the luxury or the lessons, it was learning to trust that it wouldn't all disappear. Mason hoarded food in his room, tucking granola bars and apples into drawers, unable to believe that meals would always be available. Nicholas discovered this one day and, instead of scolding, simply sat with Mason and talked about fear, survival, and learning to feel safe again. Nightmares plagued Mason's sleep, visions of his parents' deaths mixed with new fears of losing his newfound home. On those nights, Nicholas would hear his cries and sit with him, until dawn, sharing stories of his own struggles with loss and change. These quiet moments forged a bond between them that grew stronger with each passing day. The transformation was physical as well as emotional. Regular meals and proper care brought color to Mason's cheeks and strength to his frame. New clothes, tailored to fit perfectly, replaced his ragged street attire. His once matted hair, now properly cut and cared for, revealed natural waves that reminded Nicholas startlingly of his late wife's brother. But adaptation wasn't without its price. The first day at Wellington Preparatory Academy tested every ounce of Mason's resilience. As he stepped out of the Parker family car, whispers rippled through the crowd of students. The story of his adoption had made the society pages, and every privileged child knew of the street urchin who had wormed his way into the Parker fortune. "Did you sleep in a dumpster before the Parkers found you?" sneered one boy during lunch. "But I heard he's just a charity project," whispered another. "Mr. Parker's going through a midlife crisis." "Better watch your valuables," warned a third. "Once a thief, always a thief." Mason endured it silently, years of street survival having taught him when to fight and when to fade into the background. But the words cut deep, reinforcing his fears that he would never truly belong in this world. James's presence at the same school only complicated matters. The older boy made a show of ignoring Mason's existence, creating an invisible but palpable barrier that other students quickly learned to respect if they wanted to remain in the Parker heir's good graces. The teachers were professional but distant, clearly unsure how to handle this unusual addition to their elite student body. Only Miss Robertson, the English teacher, seemed to see past Mason's background. She recognized his hunger for learning and stayed after school to help him catch up, finding in his street experiences unique perspectives on literature and life. "Your voice matters, Mason," she told him one afternoon as they discussed Great Expectations Dickens himself wrote about children who rose from nothing. "Your journey is part of a grand literary tradition. But not everyone shared MS. Robertson's enlightened view. Parents complained about their children sharing classes with someone from his background. There were whispered concerns about security and social contamination. The school board held meetings, though Nicholas's substantial donations and impeccable reputation kept them from taking any action. Throughout it all, Mason poured himself into his studies with a determination born of knowing this might be his only chance at a different life. His street-honed ability to observe and adapt served him well in academics. While other students took their education for granted, Mason approached each lesson with the same intensity he had once used to survive on the streets. After several grueling months at Wellington, Mason's path crossed with a discovery that would change everything. During a community service project at a local orphanage, an ironic requirement for Wellington's privileged students, Mason found himself face to face with his past. In the play yard, among the other children, he spotted a small girl with hauntingly familiar features. Sarah, age 6, had his mother's eyes and their father's gentle smile. Mason's hands trembled as he read her file, smuggled out by a sympathetic social worker. She had been placed in the system shortly after his own disappearance, bouncing between foster homes before landing at St. Michael's Orphanage. All this time, he had had a sister he never knew existed, a final secret his mother had taken to her grave. The revelation shook Mason to his core. While he had found sanctuary in the Parker mansion, his own flesh and blood had been lost in the system. Sarah didn't recognize him. She had been too young when their family fell apart, but Mason knew instantly. But the same determined set of her jaw, the way she hunched her shoulders against the world, it was like looking in a mirror of his past. Keeping this discovery from his new family ate at him. Nicholas had already given him so much, how could he ask for more? But every night, thoughts of Sarah sleeping in the orphanage while he lay in luxury tormented him. The stark contrast between their fates made his own good fortune feel like a betrayal. James, meanwhile, had been quietly conducting his own investigation into Mason's past. Hiring private investigators and leveraging his father's connections, he had assembled a detailed dossier of the tragedy that had befallen the family. His initial intention had been to find something damaging, something to prove Mason was unworthy of the Parker name. Instead, he found himself drawn into a story of addiction, desperation, and loss that uncomfortably mirrored his own pain over his mother's death. The weight of these secrets began to show in Mason's behavior. His grades, initially climbing steadily, began to slip. Dark circles appeared under his eyes from sleepless nights spent wrestling with guilt. Nicholas noticed the change but misattributed it to the ongoing stress of adjustment and school bullying. During this time, James observed his adopted brother's deterioration with mixed emotions. Part of him felt vindicated. See, the street rat couldn't handle civilized life after all. But another part, one he tried desperately to ignore, recognized the same anguish he had felt after losing his mother, the same invisible weight that made every smile feel like a betrayal, every moment of happiness tainted by grief. Harrison, ever observant, watched the dynamics between the brothers shift. He noticed James lingering in doorways when Mason was nearby, the hostile glares softening into something more complex. He saw Mason's furtive weekly visits to St. Michael's, though he kept this information to himself, trusting that the truth would emerge when the time was right. One particularly difficult evening, Mason's nightmares drove him to the mansion's kitchen for a glass of water. There he found James, also sleepless, nursing a cup of tea. For a moment, both boys froze, trapped in the unexpected intimacy of the midnight hour. Then James, perhaps softened by exhaustion, asked quietly, "What do you dream about?" The simple question broke something in Mason. Before he could stop himself, he was telling James everything about his parents, about Sarah, about the crushing guilt of having found safety while she remained alone. James listened in silence, his tea growing cold, seeing for the first time not an intruder in his home, but a brother carrying burdens as heavy as his own. That late-night conversation marked a subtle shift in their relationship. While James didn't immediately become welcoming, The active hostility began to fade. Sometimes, when the whispers at school grew particularly vicious, James would unexpectedly appear at Mason's side, his mere presence enough to silence the tormentors. Small gestures of understanding began to replace the wall of resentment, building a fragile bridge between their wounded hearts. But the discovery of Sarah had set in motion events that would soon test these tentative bonds of brotherhood. As Mason struggled with how to tell Nicholas about his sister, forces beyond his control were already beginning to move, threatening to unravel everything he had gained and reveal secrets that would shake the Parker family to its foundations. The delicate balance of their new family unit teetered on the edge of change, while behind the mansion's stately walls, each member of the household carried their own hidden truths, waiting for the moment when all would be revealed. Mason's journey from the streets had brought him to a crossroads where past and present collided, and the choice he would make next would determine not just his future, but the fate of two families bound together by circumstance and choice. During a glittering charity gala at the Parker Mansion, the worlds of wealth and poverty collided in spectacular fashion. Mason, now dressed in a tailored tuxedo that masked his humble origins, stood uncomfortably among the city's elite. His months of etiquette training under Harrison's watchful eye had prepared him for the mechanical aspects of such events, but nothing could have prepared him for what was about to unfold. James had been watching his adopted brother throughout the evening, nursing a hidden conflict. The dossier he'd compiled about Mason's past burned in his pocket like a loaded gun. He'd spent weeks debating whether to use it, his initial desire for revenge warring with his growing understanding of Mason's character. But when he overheard two board members questioning his father's judgment in adopting a street child, something inside him snapped. "Ladies and gentlemen," James's voice cut through the elegant murmur of conversation. He stood on the grand staircase, commanding attention just as his father had taught him. "I believe it's time we address the elephant in the room." His eyes found Mason's across the crowd, and for a brief moment, regret flickered across his face. Mason felt his heart stop as James pulled out a folder. He recognized the private investigator's logo on its cover, and in that moment he knew his carefully constructed new life was about to shatter. "Many of you have wondered about my new brother's background," James continued, his voice carrying a tremor that only Mason seemed to notice. "Well, I've done some research. Mason's mother wasn't just any addict, she was Caroline Wells, the infamous embezzler who stole millions from her investment firm clients before overdosing. And his father, Thomas Wells, who chose suicide over facing justice for his role in the scheme." The room erupted in gasps and whispers. Mason stood frozen, feeling the weight of hundreds of judgmental eyes. Nicholas, who had been across the room speaking with donors, pushed through the crowd, his face pale with shock and anger. Their son disappeared before authorities could question him about his knowledge of their crimes. James pressed on, though his voice had lost some of its certainty, and now he's positioned himself to inherit the Parker fortune. The accusations hung in the air like poison. Mason could hear the whispers growing. "I knew there was something off about him. A criminal's son can't escape bad blood." The room began to spin as memories he'd fought so hard to suppress came flooding back. The sight of his mother's lifeless body, his father's final gunshot, the terror of running before the authorities could take him away. Nicholas reached the stairs, his voice thundering with rage. "James, stop this immediately." But the damage was done. The carefully constructed facade of Mason's new life had cracked, revealing the painful truth beneath. Society matrons pulled their children away from him, as if his parents' crimes were contagious. Business associates whispered behind their hands, already composing the gossip they would share at their next social gathering. Mason felt his legs moving before his mind could process what was happening. He pushed through the crowd, ignoring Nicholas's calls, running from the pitying looks and disgusted whispers. He made it to the garden before his legs gave out, collapsing beside the fountain where he had spent so many peaceful afternoons studying. The sound of footsteps made him tense, But it was James who appeared, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. "I didn't. I wasn't going to," he started, but Mason cut him off. Why Mason's voice was barely a whisper, was destroying me worth it? Does it make you feel better about your own pain? James sank onto the fountain's edge, the folder falling from his trembling hands. They were questioning Father's judgment. I wanted to prove I was protecting the family, but he trailed off, realizing the hollow nature of his justification. Nicholas found them there, his face lined with worry and anger. "Inside, both of you," he commanded. "This night isn't over." In Nicholas's study, the truth emerged in its entirety. Mason, his voice shaking, explained everything: how his mother's addiction had begun with prescription pills after a car accident, how his father had started embezzling to pay for her increasingly expensive habit, how he had found her body and heard his father's final moments. He spoke of running away, of surviving on the streets, and finally of Sarah. "I have a sister," he finished, tears streaming down his face. "She's in St. Michael's orphanage. I've been visiting her, trying to figure out how to tell you. I understand if you want me to leave now." The scandal. Nicholas raised his hand, silencing Mason's words. "You are my son," he said firmly. "Nothing in your past changes that. Your parents' mistakes are not yours to bear." He turned to James, his expression hardening. "But you, James, your actions tonight were cruel and calculated. You sought to hurt your brother out of jealousy and fear." James flinched at the word brother but didn't argue. The magnitude of what he'd done was finally sinking in. "I'm sorry," he whispered, and for the first time since Mason's arrival, his words carried genuine remorse. Outside the study, the gala continued, the scandal providing fodder for countless conversations. But inside, three broken people began the difficult process of piecing their family back together. Nicholas made phone calls, doing what damage control he could. James sat in silent shame, the satisfaction of his revenge turned to ashes in his mouth. And Mason waited, suspended between his past and his future, wondering if there was still a place for him in this world of privilege and power that had briefly felt like home. The night would mark a turning point in their lives, though none of them could know it yet. The truth, painful as it was, had finally been spoken aloud. Now they would have to decide whether to let it destroy them or use it as a foundation to build something stronger than before. The aftermath of the gala scandal hung over the Parker mansion like a dark cloud. Despite Nicholas's best efforts at damage control, whispers followed Mason everywhere: at school, at social events, even at the local coffee shop where he used to study. The weight of his parents' sins, combined with the constant scrutiny, began to wear him down. Yet it was during this difficult period that an even greater tragedy struck the family. It happened on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday morning. Nicholas was in his study, reviewing documents for an important merger, when the first signs appeared. His vision blurred, words swimming on the page before him. A sharp pain shot through his left arm, and as he reached for his phone to call Harrison, the world tilted sideways. The sound of his collapse brought Mason running from the adjacent library. Dad Mason's cry echoed through the mansion as he found Nicholas slumped over his desk. The following moments passed in a blur of paramedics, sirens, and the horrifying stillness of hospital waiting rooms. James arrived breathless, having broken multiple speed limits in his rush from school, his face pale with fear. The doctor's diagnosis was devastating: a severe stroke, likely brought on by years of stress and overwork. As Nicholas lay unconscious in the ICU, tubes and machines keeping him stable, Mason and James found themselves thrust into an unexpected alliance of shared worry and grief. Hours turned into days, and the dynamic within the Parker household shifted dramatically. James, as the biological son, was suddenly thrust into a position of authority he wasn't prepared for. Business associates and family lawyers began approaching him about contingency plans, succession strategies, and the future of the Parker empire. It was during one of these meetings that Mason overheard something that made his blood run cold. The adoption papers for the Wells boy, a senior lawyer, was saying to James they weren't fully processed before Mr. Parker's stroke. Legally speaking, his status is still uncertain. James's response was lost to the sound of blood rushing in Mason's ears. Everything he had gained, his new life, his hope for helping Sarah, the family he had grown to love, suddenly felt as fragile as a soap bubble. Without Nicholas's protection, he was once again just a street kid with a criminal legacy. The situation deteriorated further when Regina Parker, Nicholas's sister and James's aunt, arrived from Boston. She took one look at Mason and her lips thinned with disapproval. "This simply won't do," she declared during a family meeting. "With Nicholas incapacitated, we need to think about what's best for the family name. Having a child with such a background, it's not appropriate." "He's my brother James," said quietly, surprising everyone in the room, including himself, but Regina was undeterred. "He's a charity case that nearly destroyed Nicholas's reputation." And now, with Nicholas unable to complete the adoption, she turned to Mason directly. "You must understand, dear. It would be better for everyone if you return to the system until you're of age." Mason felt the walls closing in. The hospital bills were mounting, and he knew the whispers about his presence straining the family's resources. Even Harrison, usually his steadfast ally, seemed unable to meet his eyes when Regina brought up the subject of his departure. That night, as Mason sat beside Nicholas's hospital bed, holding his unconscious father's hand, he made his decision. "I'm sorry, Dad," he whispered, tears falling freely. "I can't let them tear the family apart because of me. James needs to focus on you and the business. And Sarah, I'll find another way to help her." Returning to the mansion, Mason packed quietly in the dead of night. He took only what he had arrived with, leaving behind the expensive clothes and school supplies. In their place, he left letters, one for Nicholas, one for James, and one for Harrison. Each contained his thanks, his apologies, and his reasons for leaving. The last thing he packed was a framed photo of him and Nicholas from his first Christmas with the family. In it, they were both laughing, Nicholas's arm around Mason's shoulders, as they stood before the enormous Christmas tree. Mason tucked it carefully into his old backpack, a reminder of what it felt like to belong. As he crept down the grand staircase for the last time, Mason heard movement in the kitchen. His heart stopped when he saw James standing there, a glass of water in his hand, watching him with an unreadable expression. "You're leaving?" James said. It wasn't a question. Mason nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. "Aunt Regina's wrong," James continued, setting down his glass. "Father would never want this." "But she's right about one thing," Mason replied softly. "The family needs to focus on your father's recovery. My presence here, especially now, it's just making everything harder." James took a step forward, and for a moment Mason thought he might try to stop him. Instead, his adopted brother reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "Take this," he said, pressing it into Mason's hand. "It's not much, but it should help you get started somewhere new." Mason tried to refuse, but James insisted. "Consider it an apology." "For the gala, for everything," his voice cracked slightly. "I never hated you, you know. I was just scared of losing what little family I had left. And now—" "Take care of him," Mason whispered, fighting back tears. "And James, thank you for calling me your brother, even if it was just once." With that, Mason slipped out into the night, leaving behind the only real home he'd known since his parents' deaths. The weight of his decision pressed down on him with each step away from the mansion, but he forced himself to keep walking. He had survived on the streets before he could do it again. Behind him, the Parker mansion stood silent and imposing against the night sky, its windows dark except for the soft light still burning in the kitchen where James remained, watching his brother disappear into the darkness for the second time in his young life. Living on the streets again was both familiar and startlingly different for Mason. His time with the Parkers had changed him. He could no longer ignore suffering around him the way he once had, couldn't shut off his emotions as easily. He found himself in a small apartment on the city's outskirts, paid for with James's money, working odd jobs while trying to figure out his next move. One evening, while sorting through documents at his part-time filing job in a legal office, Mason noticed something odd. A series of property transfers from Parker Industries to offshore accounts, all authorized with Nicholas's electronic signature, but the dates were all after his father's stroke. His years of watching Nicholas work had taught him enough about business to know this wasn't right. Digging deeper, Mason discovered a complex web of fraudulent transactions. Someone was systematically draining the Parker fortune, using Nicholas's incapacitation as cover. The signatures were perfect forgeries, and the paper trail was cleverly disguised, but Mason recognized the pattern. It was eerily similar to what his own father had done before his downfall. The revelation sent Mason back to the Parker mansion, not as a son returning home, but as an investigator. Hiding in the shadows of his former life, he watched the comings and goings of various business associates. Regina had taken control of day-to-day operations, with James seemingly sidelined despite being the heir. Something about her sudden involvement and the timing of the fraudulent transfers nagged at Mason's instincts. Late one night, Mason broke into Regina's office at Parker Industries, his street skills proving useful once again. What he found confirmed his worst fears. Regina had been embezzling millions, using Nicholas's stroke as an opportunity to siphon money from the company. But there was more. Hidden in her files was evidence that she had orchestrated the entire situation. Regina had hired someone to steal Nicholas's property documents, the very ones Mason had found and returned. She had planned for them to fall into criminal hands, creating a scandal that would force Nicholas to step down. When that failed, thanks to Mason's honesty, she had resorted to more direct methods. Mason found medical records suggesting that Regina had been slowly poisoning Nicholas, weakening him until the stroke was inevitable. The evidence was damning, but Mason knew he needed help to expose it. He reached out to the one person he thought he could trust, James. Meeting in secret at their old spot by the fountain, Mason laid out everything he had discovered. "She's destroying everything your father built," Mason explained, "spreading the documents before James. The company, the foundation, your inheritance, it's all being systematically dismantled." James sat in stunned silence, examining the evidence. "I knew something was wrong," he finally said. "She's been pushing me away from all major decisions, saying I'm too young, too inexperienced. But I never imagined." "We need to stop her," Mason urged. "But we have to be careful. She's dangerous. Look what she did to your father." Together, the brothers formulated a plan. James would continue playing the part of the dutiful nephew while gathering additional evidence from inside. Mason, using his street contacts and newfound legal knowledge, would work to trace the money trail and build an ironclad case. As they worked, their bond grew stronger. The shared mission healed old wounds, replacing rivalry with partnership. James found himself admiring Mason's street-smart intelligence, while Mason gained respect for James's business acumen. The investigation led them to discover something even more sinister. Regina had hired a hitman to ensure Nicholas never recovered enough to resume control. The assassination was planned for the following night, disguised as a medical emergency at the hospital. "We're out of time," Mason realized. "We have to move now." Racing against time, they put their evidence together and contacted the FBI. But they knew the wheels of justice might turn too slowly to save their father. As night fell, Mason made a decision that would change everything. "I'm going to the hospital," he told James. "Someone needs to protect him." "We're going to the hospital," James corrected, grabbing his car keys. "He's our father. We do this together." The brothers exchanged a look of understanding. Years of mistrust and rivalry had led to this moment of absolute clarity. They were family, and family protected their own. As they drove through the darkened city streets, both knew that before the night was over, everything would change again. The hospital corridors were eerily quiet as Mason and James made their way to Nicholas's room. Their footsteps echoed against the sterile walls, each sound making them tense with anticipation. Through the window of the ICU room, they could see their father's still form, monitors beeping steadily in the darkness. "We're too late," James whispered, spotting a figure in scrubs already inside the room. The person was bent over Nicholas's IV line, adding something from a small vial. Mason's street instincts kicked in immediately. The movements were too furtive, too careful to be routine medical care. Without hesitation, Mason burst through the door, startling the would-be assassin. The man spun around, revealing a face neither brother recognized. The vial dropped from his hands, shattering on the floor, its contents spreading in an ominous puddle. "Step away from him," Mason commanded, his voice low and dangerous. Years of street survival had taught him how to project authority even when outnumbered. James flanked him, blocking the door, his phone already dialing hospital security. The hitman's response was swift and violent. He lunged forward, revealing a concealed syringe. Mason intercepted him, wrestling for control of the deadly weapon. They crashed into medical equipment, monitors screaming in protest. James joined the fray, trying to pull the attacker off his brother. In the chaos, Regina appeared in the doorway, her elegant facade cracking at the sight before her. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, her composed mask slipping to reveal the desperation beneath. "You're supposed to be gone." "It's over," Aunt Regina, James declared, still struggling with the hitman. "We know everything, the embezzlement, the poisoning, all of it." Mason, using a move learned in countless street fights, finally managed to disarm the assassin. The syringe skittered across the floor, coming to rest at Regina's feet. Her face contorted with rage as she snatched it up. "You stupid boys," she snarled, advancing into the room. "You have no idea what Nicholas did to our family. Our father built this company from nothing, and Nicholas stole it from him. I'm just taking back what's rightfully ours." "By killing your own brother," James's voice cracked with disbelief. "By destroying everything he built." Regina's laugh was bitter. "Everything he built it on betrayal. Your grandfather trusted him, made him CEO over me because I was too emotional. Then Nicholas forced him out, took everything for himself. And now you two, a spoiled brat and a street rat, think you can stop me." The hitman, momentarily forgotten, used the distraction to break free. He charged toward Mason, but years of street fighting had honed the boy's reflexes. Mason sidestepped, using his attacker's momentum to send him crashing into the medical cart. The resulting clatter brought security running. Regina, seeing her plan unraveling, made a desperate move. She lunged toward Nicholas's bed, syringe raised. "If I can't have the company, neither can he." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Mason dove forward, intercepting Regina's strike. The syringe plunged into his shoulder instead of Nicholas's chest. James tackled his aunt from behind, finally bringing her down as security officers flooded the room. As Regina and her assassin were restrained, Mason slumped against the wall, the world starting to spin. Whatever had been in that syringe was powerful. His vision was already beginning to blur. Mason James's voice seemed to come from far away. "Stay with me, brother. Stay with me." The last thing Mason saw before losing consciousness was Nicholas's hand moving on the bed, the first sign of movement since his stroke. Then darkness claimed him. The next few hours were chaos. Hospital staff worked frantically to identify and counteract the poison, while FBI agents swarmed the building, securing evidence and taking statements. James refused to leave his brother's side, maintaining a vigil over both Mason and Nicholas. When Mason finally regained consciousness, he found himself in a hospital bed next to Nicholas's. James sat between them, looking exhausted but relieved. "Welcome back," he smiled, squeezing Mason's hand. "You really scared me there, brother." Nicholas Mason croaked, his throat dry. "See for yourself," James gestured to their right. There, propped up slightly in his bed, was Nicholas, awake and alert for the first time in weeks. His face was gaunt, and speaking seemed to require great effort, but his eyes were clear and focused. "My boys," Nicholas whispered, his voice weak but filled with pride. "My brave, brave boys." But the family reunion was interrupted by FBI agents wanting statements, doctors checking vitals, and lawyers discussing the evidence against Regina. But through it all, an unbreakable bond had been forged between the three men, a bond stronger than blood, stronger than tragedy, stronger than all the forces that had tried to tear them apart. Regina's plot had failed, but it had succeeded in one unexpected way. It had finally united the Parker family. As they began the long process of recovering Nicholas from his stroke, Mason from the poison, and James from the betrayal of his aunt, they did so not as separate individuals, but as a true family. The media would later call it the Parker family scandal, but within the hospital room, it was simply the night they chose each other, the night they proved that family isn't about blood or background, but about the choices we make and the people we fight to protect. News of Regina's arrest and the attempted murder at the hospital spread through the city like wildfire. The media painted it as a tale of greed, betrayal, and redemption, but they missed the most significant twist that was about to unfold. As Mason recovered in the hospital, a visitor arrived who would change everything once again. Sarah Wells's social worker, Mrs. Thompson, entered his room carrying a thick file and a revelation that would shake the foundations of everything Mason thought he knew about his past. James was present, sitting by his brother's bedside, when she began to speak. "Mason, there's something you need to know about your mother," Mrs. Thompson began gently. "The embezzlement scheme she was accused of, she wasn't the perpetrator. She was trying to expose it." Mason's world tilted on its axis as Mrs. Thompson laid out the truth. His mother had been a whistleblower, working with federal investigators to uncover a massive fraud operation within her investment firm. The evidence she'd gathered had implicated several high-ranking executives, including Regina Parker. "Your mother was getting close to exposing everything," Mrs. Thompson explained. "That's when they started poisoning her with doctored prescription medications, making it look like she was developing an addiction. When that didn't silence her, they murdered her and framed it as an overdose." James gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles white. "And our father?" he asked, looking at Mason. "What about him?" "Thomas Wells discovered the truth after his wife's death," Mrs. Thompson continued. "He left evidence in a safety deposit box, but before he could take it to the authorities, they got to him too. They made his death look like a guilt-ridden suicide." Mason sat in stunned silence, tears streaming down his face. All these years, he'd carried the shame of his parents' supposed crimes, only to learn they had died trying to expose the very corruption that had nearly destroyed the Parker family. "There's more," Mrs. Thompson said softly. "Your mother's last action before her death was to protect both her children. She split up you and Sarah deliberately, placing her in a secure foster home while leaving you with a trusted friend. But when you ran away, the plan fell apart," Mason finished, his voice barely a whisper, "and Sarah ended up in the system." James stood abruptly, pacing the room as he processed this information. "The same people who killed Mason's parents nearly destroyed our family," he said, his voice shaking. "Regina was part of it all along." The revelation transformed the dynamics between the brothers once again. James, who had once resented Mason's presence in his life, now saw him as a living testament to the courage and integrity that had cost Caroline Wells her life. The same courage he had witnessed in Mason when he returned the property documents, when he exposed Regina's plot, when he took a poisoned syringe meant for their father. As they sat together, processing this new reality, Nicholas was wheeled into the room by Harrison. Though still weak from his stroke, his mind was sharp as ever. Mrs. Thompson repeated her story, watching as the powerful businessman's face transformed with each new detail. "Your mother was a hero," Mason Nicholas said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "And now I understand why you are who you are, why you returned those documents despite having nothing, why you came back to save our family when you had every reason to stay away." James moved to stand behind Mason's chair, placing a hand on his shoulder. "It's time to make this right," he declared, "all of it." Over the next few days, as Mason continued to recover, the Parker family machinery moved with renewed purpose. James worked with their lawyers to clear Caroline and Thomas Wells's names publicly. Nicholas, speaking in halting but determined sentences, directed the establishment of a whistleblower protection foundation in Caroline's name. But the most significant change came when James arrived one morning with Sarah in tow. The little girl stood shyly in the doorway, clutching a worn teddy bear, looking so much like their mother that Mason's heart nearly stopped. "Hi, Sarah," he said softly, holding out his hand. "I'm your brother." The reunion was tearful and tender, as brother and sister found each other after years of separation. Nicholas watched from his wheelchair, his eyes moist, before clearing his throat. "Sarah," he said gently, "how would you like to come live with your brother, to be part of our family?" The little girl looked up at Mason, then at James, who smiled encouragingly. "All of us together?" she asked in a small voice. "All of us together," James confirmed, "as it should have been all along." The truth about the Wells family had done more than clear their name. It had healed the final wounds in the Parker family, transforming them from a fractured unit into something stronger and more complete than ever before. What Regina had tried to destroy through lies and manipulation, Truth and Love had rebuilt stronger than ever. 5 years after the events that nearly tore the Parker family apart, the mansion's grand ballroom was once again filled with the city's elite. But this time there was no undercurrent of scandal or whispered judgments. Instead, they had gathered to celebrate the launch of the Caroline Wells Foundation for Truth and Justice, dedicated to protecting whistleblowers and their families. Nicholas Parker, now fully recovered from his stroke, though walking with a slight limp, stood proudly at the podium. On either side of him stood his sons James, whose once cold exterior had melted into quiet strength, and Mason, whose street-smart wisdom had matured into remarkable leadership. Beside Mason, now 15, Sarah stood tall, her mother's determined spirit shining in her eyes. 5 years ago. Nicholas began, his voice strong and clear. Our family learned the true meaning of courage and justice through tragedy. Caroline Wells, whose name we honor today, gave her life to expose corruption. Her children, whom I am blessed to call my own, taught us that family transcends blood. And that truth, no matter how painful, sets us free. The foundation would become their shared legacy, a testament to Caroline's sacrifice and a weapon against the kind of corruption that had claimed her life. James headed the legal department, while Mason directed outreach programs for affected families. Sarah, though young, had already shown a passionate interest in the Foundation's mission, determined to carry forward her mother's legacy. After the speeches and applause, the family retreated to their favorite spot in the garden. Harrison appeared with a tray of hot chocolate, a tradition he had started during Mason's first days in the mansion. As they sat together under the stars, Sarah pulled out an old photograph she had recently discovered. "Mom looks so happy here," she said softly, showing them a picture of Caroline Wells laughing at a park, her arms around a young Mason. She was fighting for justice even then, wasn't she? Mason pulled his sister close. "She was fighting for us, Sarah, for what was right, just like we're doing now." James, who had been unusually quiet, cleared his throat. "I have something to tell you all," he said. "I've been working on a special project. The old Wells family home, I bought it back, had it restored." He turned to Mason and Sarah. "I thought, maybe it could be a safe house for families in the program. A place where they can feel protected while their cases are processed." Mason stared at his brother, overwhelmed by the gesture. The home where he had lost everything would now become a sanctuary for others facing similar battles. It was a perfect transformation, a symbol of their family's journey from tragedy to triumph. But Nicholas reached out, gathering all three of his children close. "Your mother would be so proud," he told Mason and Sarah. "And so am I of all of you. We've built something remarkable here, something that will outlast us all." The Foundation's first case arrived just a week later, a young mother and her two children fleeing a situation eerily similar to Caroline's. The Parker family rallied around them, offering not just protection and legal support, but understanding born from personal experience. As Mason showed them into the renovated Wells home, now a safe haven, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in the window. No longer the frightened street child who had once returned a lost portfolio, nor the wounded boy who had fled the mansion in shame. He saw instead a young man who had found his purpose, surrounded by a family bound together by choice rather than just blood. Sarah's voice called from upstairs, excited about showing the children their rooms. James was in the study, already working on the legal documentation, while Nicholas spoke softly with the mother, offering reassurance born from experience. Harrison moved quietly through the house, ensuring everyone's comfort with his usual efficiency. This was their legacy, not the Parker fortune or the Wells tragedy, but the family they had built from the ashes of both. A family that stood for truth, justice, and the unshakable belief that love could overcome any obstacle. As the sun set over the city, casting long shadows across the garden, where so much of their story had unfolded, Mason smiled. His mother's words echoed in his memory. "Honesty is the only treasure worth keeping." She could never have known how that simple lesson would shape not just his life, but the lives of so many others. The Parker Wells family had become living proof that sometimes the greatest families are forged not in perfect circumstances, but in the fires of adversity, strengthened by choice and sustained by love that transcends all boundaries. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy of all. Sacred wounds, a message of hope and faith. Sometimes our deepest pain becomes our greatest purpose. Like Sarah and Michael's journey, your struggles aren't just random acts of fate, they're sacred wounds that God will transform into channels of blessing. I think of that moment when you felt most alone, most broken. Like Sarah, homeless with Emma on that rainy night. Like Michael, grieving Claire's loss. Like their heartbreak when they lost baby Matthew. These aren't just moments of pain, they're holy ground where God is writing a larger story. Your tears, your sleepless nights, your unanswered prayers, they're not unnoticed. Every tear you've shed is counted. Every broken piece of your heart is precious in God's eyes. Just as He wove Sarah and Michael's broken pieces into a masterpiece of redemption, He's weaving your pain into something beautiful. Remember Emma's childlike faith, seeing angels when others saw only darkness. Your darkest valleys might be preparing you for your greatest mission. Your wounds might become someone else's healing. Your story of survival might become someone else's hope. Like the twins being born after the loss of Matthew, sometimes our greatest blessings come disguised as our deepest sorrows. That relationship that broke you, that dream that died, that loss that seemed unbearable, these are the very places where God plants the seeds of miracles. To those feeling lost tonight, wondering if God has forgotten you, He hasn't. Like Sarah finding her true family, your journey might be leading you to a destiny greater than you could imagine. Your broken road might be a bridge to someone else's salvation. Your faith in the darkness, your courage to keep believing when everything seems hopeless, this is holy ground. Every step of trust, every moment you choose to believe despite your pain, is building a testimony that will outlive you. So hold on, precious soul. Like the convent bells ringing hope over Chicago, your story of survival will someday ring hope into another's darkness. Your tears are watering the garden of your future testimony. Your wounds are being transformed into windows through which God's light will shine to others. Remember, in God's hands, nothing is wasted. Not your pain, not your past, not your broken dreams. Just as he turned Sarah and Michael's story of homelessness and loss into a legacy of hope through Matthew's Light Foundation, he can turn your tragedy into triumph, your pain into purpose. You're not just surviving, you're being prepared for a divine appointment with destiny. Your scars will become someone's sign of hope. Your story of survival will become someone's reason to believe. So weep if you must, but know that dawn is coming. Grieve if you need to, but hold on to hope. Like Sarah and Michael discovered, sometimes our deepest wounds become our greatest testimony, and our darkest nights lead to the most beautiful dawns. You are loved. You are seen. You are part of a greater story. And just like Sarah and Michael's journey, your story isn't over. It's just beginning. Hold on, believe, and watch as God transforms your sacred wounds into channels of healing for others. For in his divine alchemy, no tear is wasted, no pain is purposeless, and every broken heart is just a canvas waiting for his masterpiece of redemption. Your miracle is coming. Your story will bring hope. Your pain will become purpose. This is his promise to you. This is your sacred journey. This is your story of redemption waiting to be told. If Sarah and Michael's journey touched your heart, please hit that subscribe button and join our storytelling family. Share their story of faith and redemption with loved ones who need hope. Drop a like if you felt moved, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Want part 2? Let us know below. Your support inspires us to create more meaningful stories that touch hearts and transform lives.